Michael Ostrom puppeteered Cornelius in the Jim Henson Company series Earth to Ned on Disney+. He also played Rankle on the Netflix series The Curious Creations of Christine McConnell. I talked to Michael about these projects as well as Puppet Up Uncensored, No You Shut Up, the reboot of Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, and much more on this episode of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Michael Ostrom, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Oh, thanks for having me, Grant.
Excited to get to talk to you about all the many puppetry things that you have worked on and much, much more. But I always like to start by asking, do you remember your first exposure to puppetry, the first time you saw puppets?
Well, yeah, for me, it was Sesame Street. I'm one of the original Sesame Street kids. And, I'm sure my mom just plopped me down in front of it. But I do know that I loved Rubber Ducky, the song that Ernie sings, right?
Yeah.
I'm the youngest of four kids, and someone bought me a 45 of the Rubber Ducky song, and that was my record. Like my big brothers and sisters, they had records, but I had my record. And I do believe I used to perform the song for my family when I was like 4 years old,
Yeah, you are someone who, as we're going to talk about, you have a long career of performing and wanting to be a performer. Was there ever anything as a kid to being a puppeteer, or did that come later?
That came later. I did have a good friend of mine, my friend Andrew, when he was a kid. He had those awesome Sesame Street puppets, toy puppets. And he and I used to work up puppet shows and perform them for his mother in his basement. And the funny thing is, I think I've told you this before, we would often forget what we had planned to do and then just make things up with the puppets. It wasn't much of a show, but lo and behold, here I am later in life doing exactly that in Puppet Up. So prophetic, I guess. But as an adult, no, I didn't really consider puppetry until I got a job working at Jim Henson's Creature Shop.
Excellent. Well, we'll definitely get to that. I just want to throw this out there too, because I know this will factor into your puppeteer journey as well. But you were also a big Star Wars fan as a kid, right?
Oh, I was insane for Star Wars. Yeah, it came out when I was 9 years old, so it was like they just implanted the Star Wars chip in my head when I was a kid. I'm sitting in a room. I got all my old Star Wars toys back from my parents about 5 or 10 years ago, and I might as well put them up. So I still have all my crap from the 70s here. Start selling them when I retire.
Yeah, that's the retirement. When you were watching it, did you have any sort of idea that, some of these creatures and things that you were seeing were like sort of puppets, or that people were performing them, or did you just get immersed in the world?
I'm pretty sure I just got immersed in the world. But back then in the 70s, there wasn't the internet, obviously. And so we were so hungry for content about Star Wars that's when I started buying like Starlog magazine or some of the other movie magazines. And then they would have all those behind the scenes things like Rick Baker making the monster faces for the cantina scene and stuff. And that's when it started to dawn on me that, oh, these are created by people. I knew it was all fake. It's a movie, It was pretty impressive, It was pretty immersive, the first Star Wars.
Yeah. And were your parents creative while you were growing up?
Not particularly. My mom was a registered nurse. My father was a chemical engineer who worked in aerospace. So, neither one of them were artists or anything like that.
And how did you get the performing bug? When did that kind of hit you?
Well, in my little area, I grew up in Pike Creek Valley in Delaware, Newcastle County, Delaware. We had this beloved drama teacher named Betty Metz, and she had a student who became the drama teacher at my junior high school, a guy named Dave Sada. And that was back in the era of like Fame. The movie Fame was out, and I just became one of those drama kids, and it meant everything to be in a play, especially if you could get in a play directed by Betty Metz and stuff. So it was a really strong public school drama program that gave me that theater bug.
And so did you start performing like in junior high and in high school in school productions?
Yeah, absolutely. My first play was The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, where I didn't play Tom and I didn't play Huck Finn. I played the other kid. No one remembers Joe Harper. I think when Tom and Huck go off to whatever the island they're going to go live on, Joe Harper chickens out and goes home, and I think that's how the grown-ups find them because Joe Harper goes crying home to his mommy and something like that. So I was, a supporting role, but it gave me the bug, and as I got into high school, I got the larger roles and everything like that.
Was it such that performing and being in these shows, like, this is what I want to do with my life? This is I need to be a performer.
Yeah, absolutely. I had this kind of epiphany once when I was just stage managing a show for some of the upperclassmen in high school, and we were having a special rehearsal at night, and I was sitting stage right or stage left, and just watching them rehearse and kind of hanging out by the pin rail where the ropes are. And I remember I kind of had this moment of like, I'm going to be here. No matter what I do, whether I'm, the actor or the stage manager or whatever, I just felt it in my bones in that moment that I'm going to be a part of this world. So it wasn't even like a flashy moment of me being the star of something or performing. It was a backstage moment that made me feel like I want to be a part of this. And I still feel that way. When we're over at the Henston soundstage working on Puppet Up or whatever, they've got this massive pin rail, and it reminds me of my high school theater. I had a pretty big high school theater. And it just always kind of takes me back to that moment as kind of a touchstone for me. Like, yep, you did it. You're here. You're in the biz.
Yeah. For better or for worse, here I
For
am.
better, for worse, yeah.
Well, and you went on to study theater and get a degree in it in college, right? At Temple University?
I went to Temple University. I got a BA in theater, and while I was there, I had the great fortune to work at a theater. It's a great theater in Philadelphia called the Wilma Theater. I was able to perform there while I was an undergraduate, so I was pretty fancy that way. It's funny. My roles at the Wilma got smaller as I went along, but I did three. I worked on 3 different shows there when I was an undergraduate, and that again solidified that I'd made the right choice for myself.
So after you graduated, you spent some time with the California Shakespeare Festival as well.
Yeah, I did. I had visited a friend of mine up at Stanford and done some theater with him. He was in the directing program there, and I kind of fell in love with California. So while I was back in Delaware after I graduated, I'd worked a little bit at the Delaware Theater Company, but I applied for an apprenticeship at the California Shakespeare Festival, and I got in. That's where I did all my Shakespeare work because that ended up turning into 2 additional seasons with them, and that was my whole. I lived in the East Bay and then over in San Francisco, and I had basically spent the early half of the 90s doing a lot of theater in the San Francisco Bay Area, which was just wonderful. I made a lot of good friends and had a lot of great experiences doing that.
Yeah, well, and you're someone who I love performing with you in Puppet Up and other things we get to perform in because it's partially your training in theater, and it's just I know that if we get a theater style, you're going to knock it out of the park, and it's so easy to improvise with you, in that kind of thing, and definitely like if we get the suggestion for a Shakespeare scene or whatever, it seems to me, looking from the outside, that you really enjoy sort of Shakespeare and a little bit of that classic theater stuff.
Yeah, I haven't done it in a long time. I do miss it somewhat because it's so challenging to, the job of an actor when you're doing classical theater is to digest the material. You do a lot of table work, you do a lot of research, and then to just have it become something that just comes out of you like second nature. Because if you can digest that material and process it and then regurgitate it, probably isn't the word I'm looking for, but let's just say regurgitate it. Your job is to make it understandable to the audience by you understanding it so clearly. And for example, I saw a production of Pericles by Shakespeare once that was absolutely baffling to me. It was just like I couldn't follow it because the performance was so stilted and so Shakespearean. And then I saw a production at the New Jersey Shakespeare Festival, same play, Pericles, and it was done in this kind of broad and hokey style that maybe a purist might think was sort of trite, but I understood everything they were saying. And I think, is this the same show that I just saw at this Fancy Pants Theater, earlier? So I just thought the second version of the production, the people had done their work, they'd done their homework. And Shakespeare and classical theater shouldn't be something that is so obtuse that people are turned off by it. A really good Shakespearean production, you're going to not notice that the language is heightened or different. So I certainly something I always aspired to is to make it, to communicate it to the audience in a way that puts them at ease and helps them follow along. And I get a kick out of it because it is such a challenge. And you do feel like you're part of something bigger when you're doing a play that's 400 something years old, and still getting laughs from it or getting the audience to get moved by it or whatever. So, and then, I get a kick out of making fun of it too when we get to do the puppet stuff, of course.
Right. When is there going to be, I mean, I'm sure there has been in some form, but when is there going to be a big mainstream puppet Shakespeare production?
Oh, I don't know. Never. I don't know. I mean, I'd
Never.
love to see someone try. I've seen some
Yeah.
things. I've seen some weird things where people do, and people will put puppetry in Shakespeare. Of course, there's like in The Winter's Tale. There's always this challenge of one of the characters gets eaten by a bear, and in Shakespeare's time, probably someone put a bear skin on and ran it. It probably looked hokey in Shakespeare's time, but I'm sure productions have tried to do a bear puppet. We were doing it up at Cal Shakespeare. We were doing Winter's Tale, and someone suggested we just borrow the Cal Berkeley mascot suit. I think his name was Oski the bear. Let's just have everything stop and have the Cal mascot come out and eat the guy.
Perfect.
Yeah, we're not going to fool anybody that there's a real bear on stage.
Right. Well, I mean, I looked over your resume before on your website, michaelostrom.com,
Mm.
before this interview, and you've just done so much theater work. But of course, I'm going to have to ask you about the Steve Martin play, Picasso at the La Pin Agile, which I don't know if I said correctly, but there you go. But yeah, could you tell a little bit how you auditioned for that and got into that and your experience working on the Steve Martin production?
Sure, sure. The play's old enough that there's no spoiler alert that Elvis Presley is a character in the play. He comes in at the end. But the play is basically kind of like a joke. Steve Martin said, "What if young Einstein and young Picasso meet in a bar?" And the bar is the Le Pen Agile in Paris when they're very young men, and they both kind of have a intellectual duel over what is going to dominate the 20th century. Is it going to be art, or is it going to be science? And at the end of the play, a meteor crashes in the bathroom and young Elvis Presley walks out and he gives Picasso the vision for one of his great paintings. So my, at the time, girlfriend and now my wife, Zachary Barton, the play came to San Francisco. The national tour of the play came to San Francisco from New York City. And so one by one, they replaced the New York actors with San Francisco actors. So I weaseled my way into an audition, and the role would be for the role that I played, Schmendeman, who also that actor understudied Einstein and understudied Elvis. And they kind of got the feeling the casting director didn't want to see me for it because she didn't see me as an Einstein or an Elvis. But Zachary, my now wife, she dressed me up as Elvis Presley. I sprayed my hair black. I put on a little makeup. I gave myself what they call the bee sting lip, that young Elvis had. And I walked into that audition and I did my Elvis Presley impersonation. And I remember I was very proud of the fact that the director turned to the casting director after I did my bit as Elvis and said, "I know I want to call him back. How do I call him back?" Like right in front of me. I was like, "Oh, I guess I nailed it." But the character I played every night was Schmendeman, who stands in as Steve Martin's wild and crazy guy kind of a character. He comes in before Elvis and he says, "I'm as if he's the third genius." And he's just a doofus. He's just a moron who, it just has a lot of positive, kind of that unearned confidence that's always so funny, in comedy. So I got that part. And like I said, I understudied Einstein, understudied Elvis, and I did that show for over 2 years. The San Francisco company ended up becoming the national touring company, and I did that show for a good long time. It was a great gig, and it was very rewarding.
Yeah, I just always feel that if you get to do something and you get to do it over and over again, you just get so good at it that it like like it almost erases all the fear, or any trepidation you may have because
Yeah.
you've just done it so much and it's like, well, if I drop a prop, who cares? It's like no big deal.
Yeah, well, if
Um,
you do a show that long and if something different happens, everyone on stage, if they're professionals, you can't tell that this is like the 5,000th performance of this show. But when something anomalous happens, it sure wakes everybody up. It sure is like one night I remember the guy playing Picasso put his jacket in a different place and it was kind of in my way, and I was thrilled. I have a challenge. The part I played Schmindeman, I will admit that it was a tough nut to crack, and for the first like month or so in the show, I just wasn't getting the laughs. I was struggling in the part. And then, I don't know, one day something snapped and I guess I figured out the formula. And then I'll say this in hindsight since it was so long ago, and I'll see with hubris that I was bulletproof. I figured out how to play the role in a way that even if it wasn't a really lively audience, I nailed it. And I used to get exit applause on the part and everything. I think I figured out the formula of Steve Martin's writing, what he was doing with this part, what the show needed in the moment I made my entrance. And, it became smooth sailing after that, but it took a while. And then the challenge when you're doing a long run like that is how to keep it fresh, how to keep it so it's happening for the first time. But I think it takes a while. It takes a while for an ensemble to get to that place. When I was in high school, you work for like 2 months to put on a play and then you do 3 performances of it. So when I got to college and I did those shows at the Wilma, that was the first time I did a long run of a show, and I learned the lessons of how to maintain your performance. And I kind of struggled with that too. I started to forget my lines, which is really weird. And after a while, though, and I think if Picasso had gone on a little longer, I probably would have left it, because after a while, you're not being artistically fulfilled as much playing the same thing every night. That's why I'm so glad we get to do improv shows, because it's never the same thing.
Right, right. And you also toured with that show too, like on the road a little bit, right?
Yeah, like I said, the San Francisco company became the National Touring Company, and we toured for almost a full year. And then we did a lovely sit down, as they call it, at the Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. And that was fun for me as a history buff to be in that, infamous building, to be able to look up stage left and see, well, there it is. There's the box where it all happened. There's the draping and the picture of Lincoln up there. And yowza, could have been a night like this.
Yeah. Well, how did you decide to being somebody? I mean, I know you grew up on the East Coast and then you moved to San Francisco, and we're working there. And but how did you decide to settle in LA? Was that just like, well, that's I want to do performing. That's where you go.
Yeah, and particularly I wanted to do film and television, which, some of that comes through San Francisco. There's some commercials that cast and shoot in San Francisco, but not enough. And I wanted to try to come down here and just, take my stab at the big pie down here. So Zachary and I moved down here in the late 1990s, and I started taking classes at the Groundlings until the money ran out and I needed to get a job. And a friend got me a job answering phones at Jim Henson's Creature Shop, if you've ever heard of it.
I'm familiar, yes. So yeah, so what was that interview process like? Getting hooked up with the Creature Shop? Was it like a simple business interview, or
I no. Two good friends of mine were already working there, Tom Lenoci and Vinny DeRamus, and both of them had attended ACT up in San Francisco, where I met my wife. I did a show at ACT, and those guys and my wife were students there, so they were good friends of mine. And I said, I'm looking for a job, and the Creature Shop was particularly busy. And one of the guys, Vinny, needed to go up to Vancouver to shoot B-roll on the movie Cats and Dogs. And he just needed someone to cover his desk, basically, as a production assistant runner, as someone answering phones. So I worked there for 1 week. And then at the end of that week, I believe, or sometime around then, the Creature Shop was going to start building the Disney film, The Country Bears, as you are fond of.
yes?
And the 1 week turned into, well, can you work here for another 2 months? And the 2 months turned into 11 years.
And during that time, what sort of things were you doing? I mean, you were answering phones, but I'm sure the job entailed much more than just answering the phone.
Oh, well, yeah. Basically, I was the runner too. A runner is someone who goes out and runs all over town and buys all the materials that the Creature Shop needs to build stuff. And this was children gather around. This was in the days before, having Google Maps or Google Earth on your phone or whatever like that. So I used a Thomas guide, and I would drive all over Burbank to all the different retailers, different like Dentist Supply Company. We used to buy a lot of materials from them, Industrial Metal Supply. I'm trying to remember all the places I used to go. I did it long enough that I didn't need the map anymore. I knew how to zip around Burbank and find all that. Boy, I tell you what, a job like that sure cures your road rage. And you realize, wait a minute, I'm getting paid to sit in traffic. Hey, no big deal.
Turn on the radio. Hey.
Yeah. So that it was a very simple job basically. And we really did. It was a good office to work in because we really prided ourselves on making sure that the fabricators never had to wait for anything. If they needed something, we'd go out and get it. We would make sure that the production of the creatures and the puppets didn't have to wait for anything like that. And it was a good, tight office. It was a really good time. I was very fond of it. It was kind of office where it was a really great place to work. Oh, and it's the Jim Henson Creature Shop, so it's really cool, too. It's really cool and interesting, and there's monsters being made in the back room and stuff. And so it was really delightful. And I was working with my good friends, too. So it was just a win-win-win all over the place.
And as you stayed there, I mean, you said you were there for 11 years. You started doing more stuff, like you were working on budgets and things as well, right?
Yeah, well, eventually I guess I kind of I got promoted. I kept getting promoted. I guess I was, for an actor, I was pretty good at doing business stuff, I guess, because I started as a production assistant, and then I became the production coordinator. And then I became the production coordinator, is the person that tells the production assistants where to go and what to do. And then I ended up being the production manager. And that's where I'm in charge of of the projects. I would help the creative supervisor, Peter Brook. He would do the artistic stuff, and I would figure out how to hire the people, who to hire. He would figure out who to hire, and I would make the offer, and I would just kind of shepherd all the different builds to delivery. Everything from making sure there are meetings set up so that the creatives can talk to their creatives, to making sure we've hired the fabricators and all the right fabricators, and budgeting the amount of time the fabricators would work. Like, I would figure out what's the budget we agreed on and how to kind of back into that budget to make sure we didn't go over budget, or if we did go over budget, that it was because of a creative change had been made and everyone agrees that this is a change order. So I did a lot of negotiating with producers. And the tricky thing about that is, puppets are a very unique world. So I realized quickly I'm going to need to, and this sounds like not condescending, but it sounds like, oh, people might balk at a change order at the cost of something, but then I would just kind of have to shepherd them through, like, well, you're going to need all this if you want to be successful on the day that you shoot. I kind of found myself having to re-explain the puppet and the creature world to outside producers often. And I got the hang of that and made sure everybody stayed happy and everything like that. It was very challenging at first, but I got into the swing of it, and I found myself really enjoying it.
Did that job give you a different perspective? Like now, when you work on something like, say, Earth to Net or something, you're just like, yeah, I know how much this costs, or you know what I mean? Like, this is, does it just give you a different way of looking at it, other than just, hey, I'm doing a job doing puppets, or not? Have you just totally forgotten all that stuff?
No, it certainly gives me an appreciation, like with the Cornelius puppet, which is a beautiful puppet. I mean, everyone talks about the Ned puppet, which is a beautiful puppet, but the Cornelius puppet was a real work of art too. And I just kind of knew that if something broke down on him, that I didn't need to panic, that the Creature Shop people are awesome and wonderful, and they built this thing from scratch, and they know how it works, and they probably have backup parts, and I also knew how to communicate with them. Like, for example, Cornelius was a beautiful puppet, but he had a little connection at the base of his neck, like what we'd call the occipital ridge, I guess, on Cornelius. And I just knew, instead of being like, here, fix it for me, I was able to get my head up in there with the flashlight myself and kind of get me, and then one of the other fabricators and mechanics were both had our heads up inside Cornelius's belly trying to figure this thing out, because I knew, like, it's just a matter of sticking a piece of rubber in there. I know it is. It's nothing to panic over. And also I knew a little downtime right now is going to make sure that we can keep shooting, instead of being like, oh my God, it's broken. Oh no, what's going to happen? I just kept me calm. I've been through this before. And like I said, the Creature Shop are pros. And yeah, it was great to be able to have a shorthand with them to keep things flowing and keep things going as we were shooting.
Excellent. Well, how did sort of the transition start to happen of you working at the Creature Shop, but then I don't know if I have this timeline 100% right, but you sort of started working on projects as a puppeteer. Like, I know you were the gorilla on The Middleman, and you were a pigeon on Pushing Daisies, and
Mm-hmm.
the owl and Where the Wild Things Are. So how did that transition sort of start? Was that just you going like, hey, can I try that? Or as project manager putting yourself in there, or how did that work?
I think it probably started when I started training with Puppet Up.
Okay.
The thing with the Puppet Up, I don't know when those workshops started, around 2005 maybe or so. I was the one that found all the puppets that they could use for Puppet Up. This was after the Muppets had sold to the Disney. So Jane Gutnick and I had to go through the Muppet database and find all the puppets that did not belong to Disney that we could then use in Puppet Up. And we found quite a few puppets, some of which are still in the show. And then I would go, believe it or not, some of these puppets are held together by Scotch tape, it seems. I would set up the room for the Puppet Up rehearsrsals and then leave and think, oh, that looks like fun. I do improv. That'd be fun. And then the next morning I'd go and put it all away again, and slowly, I don't know who to thank for this, whether it was my boss, Angela Burroughs, whether it was Jane Gutnick, or whether it was Pete Brook, but somewhere down the line, I got invited to participate in the Puppet Up workshops. And that's where, we learned to do puppetry, and I brought my improv experience into it. And then that became a thing where, because I'd learned manipulation and stuff like that, then I was being considered for the jobs that would come into the shop, a few of them. I would often, we'd gather a list of puppeteers to recommend. Brian Henson would recommend them, or Pete, and I would never put my name on that list because I thought, that seems a little underhanded. But then Pete would put my name on the list, and some of the jobs I auditioned for, and some of the jobs, I'll admit, they were proximity. I was there meeting with them, and they would have me do it. I didn't get every gig, but I did get a few gigs out of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've talked to on the show before. It's, if you're a builder or involved in that aspect of it, it's a kind of shorter path to get the job because you built the puppet. You know what I mean? Or
Certainly.
you like
Yeah.
you said, the proximity. So it's nothing, that happens.
Yeah, I was going to be on set anyway because I was the production manager and I was going to be, managing the Henson crew on set. There'd be like two or three people that would go along with a complicated animatronic creature on a show, and just kind of made sense to have me wiggle the eyeballs, as we say, or whatever, you know.
Yeah. So going from sort of the production side of things to puppetry, how hard was it to learn like sort of the Henson techniques? I mean, I know you were receiving training through Puppet Up, but like monitor work and all that kind of stuff. Did that come easy to you, or was that a bit of a challenge at the start?
Oh, it was definitely a challenge at the start, as you know, like that whole backwards monitor thing can really screw with your head. It's been so long that I kind of don't really remember it being that difficult, but I do, I would, with a lot of confidence, enter a scene and realize I'm on the other side of the frame. I came into this shot like gangbusters, and I'm just completely wrong. But I've kind of got my head around that now. But no, it's a tricky thing to learn how to do. Let alone little things that we don't think about so much anymore, like keeping your puppet at a consistent height for the duration of a scene. Let alone that the Henson way of making the eyes appear in the frame and everything, and lip sync. Which these are things that I still have my zones of concern where I still need to, I still get notes on certain aspects of puppetry. I don't know that I'm the greatest technical puppeteer, but I think what I bring to it is my acting experience and my improv experience, and hopefully those compensate for maybe my whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Yeah, and also you are left-handed as well,
Yeah.
which most everything, is built around right-handers, and when, setting up shots and stuff, everyone just thinks, "Oh, the puppeteers will be standing this way," and then it's like, "Oh, no, left hand." So, uh, I don't know, was that like another hurdle, or was that, easy to just get people to see and work around and stuff like that?
It's not so much of a hurdle, but it is something that I just kind of think like, well, everyone here is right-handed, or they like you said, they designed this shot assuming a right-handed puppeteer would be doing it, and I got to cram my body under this thing in a different way. But as I learned that as the shot is getting set up to make sure I speak up for myself and make sure that there's room for me in the shot and whatnot. And then there's a way to just compensate. Look, if everyone's lined up and they're all crammed together and they're all right-handed people, I can kind of contort my body in a different direction and do the kind of the way we kind of spoon each other, I guess is what you might want to call it. And I've also become a little ambidextrous. When we were the windy bit that we do in the show, when I'm one of the windy girls, I have to do that right-handed. And I tried doing it left-handed and just thought, oh no, I can't do this. But instead of saying I can't do this, I thought, I've been doing this for years now. Figure it out, kid. And I did. And it's really, there's been times in the Muppets when I work with the Muppets in big crowd scenes where I've had two puppets on each hand. I think you get enough experience. I wouldn't try to do a scene right-handed right now, but if I absolutely had to, I'd be curious to see how well I did. I think I have enough
Yeah.
experience now that I might be able to make it work. I wouldn't prefer to, but I probably could. Basically, the biggest challenge is fitting yourself into a scrum of other puppeteers as a lefty. And now, if you see me in a Puppet Up show, I always take that stage right position in the beginning of the scene because that's just easier to get my 6'1.5" head out of the shot if I'm standing stage right, putting my puppet into the frame that way.
Yeah.
I'll do that in class all the time. If someone lines up with me in class, I go, I'll be over here. I'll be over on this side. Thank you.
Well, you brought up something good, and I want to ask about this, and because I do think it's important, and it's something that I struggle with, but that is speaking up for yourself.
Hmm.
Because I think a lot of times, if I'm lucky enough to get on a show or to do something, and someone says, "Oh, you're going to go do this," and I see a problem, like I'll just be like, "Okay, well, I don't want to say anything because we got to keep going." You know what I mean? And but the importance of speaking up for yourself.
Well, to me, I think that's where the Creature Shop experience comes in because I was on set often, representing the Henson Company and being a liaison between the production and the performers. And I realized, the big issue is keeping the day moving and making sure I've anticipated any little bumps that might come up. So I think it gave me that confidence like I would often have a commercial producer would want to do a thing with the Henson Company, and I would go over the costs they're going to need, not just the building of the puppets and hiring the puppeteers, but I would say you're going to need to rent, 2 or 3 or 4 monitors, so all the puppeteers can see what they're doing, and they would balk at that. Like, what do you need monitors for? And you and I know why we need monitors. It's how you do television puppetry. But this is a producer on the other end of the phone just thinking dollars and cents. And I would learn to say to them, because it will keep your day moving. If we spend a day playing the game of the director saying, "Oh, it doesn't look like you're looking in the right place," it's absurd to do puppetry without monitors in television and film. But I would have to encourage these people. I did a little bit on The Middleman. I did a couple episodes of The Middleman, and I did a one episode about vampires, about the spirit of Dracula was stuck in a ventriloquist dummy. And it's a great show by Javier Grillo Marchó. And the show ends at a ventriloquism convention where the spirit is jumping from ventriloquist to ventriloquist. And I was one of the last ventriloquists to have the Dracula puppet stuck on his hand. And this show, didn't want to use monitors to do this. But we were doing basically an over-the-shoulder shot of me and my shoulder and the back of the Dracula puppet's head. And it needed to kind of come into a shot and hit a mark so you could see the actress's face reacting to the puppet. And they didn't have a monitor for me. And it was the end of the day, and it was getting really frustrating because I couldn't stick it. I'm standing in the open air, trying to nail a spot in space. And I just turned to the camera guy and I said, does your camera have a little monitor? And it did. He had a tiny little 3-inch monitor on a little swivelable little arm. And I said, if you turn that so I can face it, we can all go home, Yeah. And he did. And I nailed it, because I could see what I was doing,
Yeah.
So it was my responsibility. I think the Creature Shop taught me every minute that goes by is money, let alone the stress of the crew and everything like that. So it's my responsibility to speak up. Like if Cornelius's neck busted, it's my responsibility to speak up and say, we got to fix this right now because I'm going to blow a lot of takes if his head keeps getting stuck. He would do this thing where his head would just kind of jerk in a weird position. That was me trying to bend his neck through a piece of metal. So I knew the best thing to do right now is to stop for 5 or 10 minutes instead of wasting an hour trying to nail a shot, So it comes from a sense of responsibility. It comes from being a former crew person, that it's my job to make sure not only the performance is good, but that technically everything's set up right so we can just keep on humming along. And then you get to, experiment and play because you're not worried about the technical aspect of stuff.
Right. They're not going to think you're a diva just because you asked for a monitor to be moved or you asked for a monitor because you need it. That's what you need to do your job.
Exactly. And I do try to couch it in those terms, we know there are some divas that will ask for a bunch of stuff and, but I think because I come from a theater background, a show must go on kind of background, and definitely the technical experience I had, that it's not diva-ish to keep the day moving, to keep everything humming along,
Well, you mentioned that you've worked with the Muppets and you've done a lot of, is it additional Muppet performer? Is that the title that?
Yeah, I guess, some people frown on the term Muppeteer. I think it's kind of a cute term, but we get credited as additional Muppet performers. And I have been doing that. I did that for quite a while. I did get to work on a day and a half on the new Muppets Mayhem piece. But for a good long there, for about 10 years or so, I did a lot of Muppet stuff. Somewhere I have a list of all the Muppets I've puppeteered. Of course, I would never take credit for playing those characters because the main performers play those characters. But like as you know, if like Bill Barretta is in a shot with Dr. Teeth and Ralph, he plays both of those characters. So someone like me would manipulate the Dr. Teeth puppet, but I wouldn't speak any dialogue. One time I said a line of dialogue as Ralph that Bill would then dub later. And it is a little nerve-wracking because you're like, do I do an impersonation? I kind of have to do it in character. I have to move the puppet and speak in character. So my voice was a little quiet. It wasn't as confident, but I got the shot and everything.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, as you say, you're performing these characters in a big group scene or whatever, but like people still know every single one of those characters. And and somebody's always looking at one of those characters. So is there like a pressure of like, I have to know every one of these characters' personalities and how they would stand in this scene? Or is that something like you maybe ask beforehand, like, hey, how would so and so do this during this thing? Or
Well, I never really felt a pressure to do it. I felt more of a responsibility to do it. There's an example in that is often Bill Beretta would have me do Bobo the bear, who's such a large puppet that he's on a backpack, kind of like Cornelius was on a backpack. And before every take, Bill would remind me there's a very special way to hold the Bobo puppet. The Bobo puppet, if you put your hand in it, and then how do I describe this in an audio way? I could just put my hand in the puppet and just puppeteer the face, but he reminded me that you then do a thing where you kind of squinch his face down a little bit so that his snout is more parallel to the ground and not sloping down at a 45-degree angle. The puppet's not necessarily built that way. And Bill would kind of, he would come over and very quietly in his very friendly Bill Beretta wink, Michael, remember to flatten that snout, flatten that snout, flatten that snout. And, there have been other times, I think some of the main puppeteers have been very, very nice. I remember Steve Whitmire came up to me once. I was doing Link Hogthrob in the background for the first, Jason Segel movie. And he kind of pointed out to me that you kind of push Link Hogthrob up because he's very confident. He's this movie star kind of guy. And he's always sort of kind of has like a pull up his, what, a little bit. He's a very upright, rigid guy. You never let him hunk down. You never let him kind of like sag. He's always kind of upright. And he just told me that, and I just remembered that. And okay, that's my job, is to make it look as if he's puppeteering that character, not me.
do you learn a lot about puppetry or puppetry for film, getting to sit and watch these performers like Steve Whitmire and Bill Beretta and Dave Goelz actually do their work? Like, do you sit there and watch them perform?
Absolutely. Yeah. If whether I'm waiting for my turn in the back of a shot or I'm just sitting to the side. Yeah. But then again, you do and you don't because they make it so effortless. Like their technique is honed, If anything, I always joke like I want to be Dave Goelz when I grow up because he's so experienced and he's so casual on set, and he's so comfortable. And he's so, not that he's not impressed by the trappings, but he's not intimidated by the trappings because he knew Jim. He's been there since practically the beginning, So I always joke like I want to be like Dave Goelz. But I did learn from his attitude on set to just relax, just be here. It's fun. We get to do this. It's great. It's a great experience. It's delightful. And, we're just putting on a puppet show, even though it's like the Beatles of puppets,
Right.
And then also just learning again, like the thing about like asking for monitors, setting up a shot, to just not freak out about it. Just know we're all here to trying to accomplish the same goal. And it's a gig, it's a job, and we have a job to do.
Well, we've mentioned Puppet Up a couple times on here, and that's where I met you. I think was through Puppet Up, and it's such a unique show. And I'm wondering if you, like me, because I also have a theater degree, you really take to it because it is a live show as opposed to working in television and film. Do you have a preference of like you? I mean, I know if money is the subject, the television and film will win the day. But
Yeah.
Do you have a preference of doing movie stuff or Puppet Up, or like if Puppet Up could pay your bills forever, would you rather do that forever because it's live?
Well, I think I'd rather do it all, of course. But
Right.
I feel very comfortable doing Puppet Up. Like my first Puppet Up show, my wife came to see it and said she thought I was going to have a heart attack because I looked so scared sitting in the bleachers. And I was scared. I was terrified, because I was new to puppetry and trying to do both at the same time. But now I'm reminded of a review I got back in San Francisco. That I was very proud of this review. A critic said that when Michael Oosterom takes the stage, the audience is immediately put at ease. I'm like, oh, I wasn't trying to do that, but so be it. I really feel very comfortable up on stage and Puppet Up. I know that improv is kind of the daredevil act, and part of the fun is the audience. They don't want to see us fail, but they want to see us rise to the challenge. And each improv is an opportunity for them to see, are they going to figure it out? Are they going to make something funny out of that suggestion? And I guess I've been doing it long enough that I feel very comfortable in that position. And I feel very comfortable kind of putting the audience at ease. And just part of the show is watching us in our black outfits, and how we react to the suggestions and how we interplay with each other. And I've been doing it long enough now that it's just, again, I wouldn't say that I feel like I'm bulletproof because that's hubris. And the next thing I know, my next improv is going to stink out loud. But I definitely feel very comfortable doing that show for sure. Yeah, I think doing things like the Vegas residency when we did the show in Las Vegas. I mean, first you're a little nervous. What's the Vegas audience going to be like? Then we figured out what the Vegas audience was going to be like, and they wanted a raunchier show than maybe we even promised. But doing the show night after night, it was almost like doing the show in the classroom, like kind of entertaining each other, kind of like being super duper comfortable. That goes back to the Picasso show. Like I cracked the nut on the Schmendeman character because I did it for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
By the end of the 2.5 years, I think I had it figured out. And I put the audience at ease, I guess.
I love performing in Puppet Up wherever we get to do it, but I especially like, when we do get to do things like the Vegas show, or you and I were up in Toronto together, when we did the show there, and even the Scary Farm, doing Not Scary Farm. I don't know, like there is some fun of like, I don't know, especially Scary Farm, because it's like you're doing one whole show, but it's broken up into 3 segments. So kind of in between, you can kind of chat about like, hey, did you see this, or when that happened, or whatever. Um,
Yeah, yeah. The Scary Farm was kind of like a nice, friendly kind of a grinder. You're just going to crank out a
right.
bunch of shows. And the audience was really enthusiastic to be there. And boy, I think we've really we've really made a big Southern California audience for the show, because now when we do it up in Hollywood, it's sold out and everything. And people are coming up from Scary Farm to come see Puppet Up. I mean, I think when you're inside Puppet Up, you're thinking about all the things you got to do. You forget how impressive it might be to people who've never seen it before. It's kind of dazzling, I think, between the improvs and the historical recreations and the musical numbers and everything. Yeah, doing a lot of it makes it easier, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
doing
for
it,
sure.
and doing it at Not Scary Farm even makes it even easier from there, because the audience is so effusive.
Yeah, and you do a lot of it.
Yeah.
Um, well, one show I want to talk about, because I think it's a show that you enjoyed being on, and it kind of came out of Puppet Up, is No You Shut Up,
Oh,
with Paul F. Tompkins, and you
yeah.
were one of the core performers on there. What was it like, sort of doing a topical show? I know it wasn't like necessarily on the moment topical, but it was a pretty topical show.
It was a topical show. It was tricky because it came out on Thursdays, and I think I can't. If I'm right, you were watching on Thursday night on Fusion TV. I don't remember what network it was on. You were watching a show we had filmed a week before,
Yeah,
and so towards the end of the run of that show, they started putting like a hole in the show where we could shoot something quick on Tuesday that week that could be inserted in the show, so we could try to keep up with it. And I got to say, I wish we could keep doing that show forever. But when Donald Trump became, the nominee, or was going to become the nominee for the Republican Party, he's however you feel about him, he's a constant source of of breaking news, maybe you might want to call
yeah.
it. And I remember thinking, we can't keep up with this guy. Towards the end of one of my characters, Oliver Pouch, they made him a tiny little MAGA hat. I thought that was adorable. It was challenging. What was exciting for me, I tend to be kind of a current affairs type of person, is like a talk show, they would give you news articles to read before we got to set. The night before, 2 days before, they would send us a bunch of links to educate ourselves on the subject matter that we might be talking about. And they had scripted content for us, but they encouraged us to improvise. And certainly when we had guests in the chairs, we were going to improvise and riff and stuff. And I was in hog heaven. I just loved it because I got to insert my opinion, maybe through a character, whether I'm being satirical or whether I'm being earnest with the character and stuff. And I think I did 45 episodes of that show, and it was just great fun. It was just so much fun. Still one of my favorite things I've ever worked on. I wish more people could have seen it. I loved working with Paul. He's an improv genius and a really great guy. And I got to play with my friends with these puppets and doing, wisecracking about current affairs and culture and stuff like that. Yeah, it was a real rewarding experience.
Yeah, you played multiple characters on that show, just a ton
Yeah.
of characters. And this is, it's a question about this show, but also in general. But do you have a method for keeping your characters straight in your head? Like, oh, I know I'm going to do this, and he's got this voice and this attitude. Is it just a mental thing of remembering, or do you write it down, or how do you keep track?
I think I've always, been an instinctual actor. I don't know. I can't say I have a scientific method for how I drop into a character. I think the good training I got in high school and college and the experiences I had, I think I definitely, as a young performer, I set out consciously or not to be a character actor. The honor in acting for me as a young performer was disappearing into the role. So I think I developed kind of a shorthand in my head and in my body of clicking into a character. And it doesn't really, it's not really a challenge for me. I think it just is I just get into a mindset of like, well, this is how the Constitution, which is a puppet I puppeteered, would react to this, or this is how Oliver Pouch, who was this kind of slimy politician guy who would just lie to your face and then the next second tell you, he didn't say the thing he just said. I just kind of click into that groove and hide. I definitely think I'm one of those people that, probably because I was an overweight kid and self-conscious about all that, I got into acting as one of those introverts who is gonna, if you're gonna make fun of me, I'm gonna stand in front of the whole class and be a class clown. Then I'm gonna drop into this character and be this thing instead of to kind of deflect you away from who I really am. I'm gonna be a character, and then once it's almost like, I don't know, I wouldn't call it being schizophrenic, but it is it's kind of comes easy to me. I dare say.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. I know you play different characters on that show. If you do get to play a character more than once, like each time you play it, it kind of cements a little bit more into you. Like, oh, this is who this character is.
Yeah, you build a history for that character. It starts to
Yeah.
accumulate after a while, right?
And on that show, were you kind of free to do that? If you came up with something, it's like, oh, this is what he is now, and the production was like, yeah, okay, that's fine. You know what I mean? Like, to build that history that maybe necessarily wasn't written at the beginning.
Sure, to a point. I think they gave us great leeway and great freedom, and they really trusted us on that. There was only a very few times where they would say, "We wrote him to say this," and I would think, "Well, he wouldn't say that." We're like, "Well, he would." I'm like, "Okay, you hired me to do this, and I'll make that work. That's my job, is to make the material work, right?" And
Right.
there are other times when I've been on shows where, like, not to jump around, but on Earth to Ned, as we were trying to figure out who Cornelius would be. The head writer and I, Eliza Skinner. I mean, there's one great day where I was riffing as Cornelius, and she kind of came up to me in between takes and said, "So he's not dumb, is he?" I was like, "Nope, he's not dumb. He knows his place, and he's making the best of his situation." And from that day, not that there was any problem before that, but I think that was when she and I kind of got together in our brains about who that character would be, and the writing started to reflect that. So it's very
Yeah.
collaborative. And I've never really had any situation where someone has said, "You're doing it wrong," or anything like that. I think because the shows I've been in have tended to hire me because of the improv, I think that's what they hire me for, is to flesh out these characters and have them make sense.
Yeah. Well, you also got to play the role of Blurp on Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, sort of the revamping of the classic Sid and Marty Krofft show. Can you tell us a little bit about working as that character, as the, I want to say evil, but as the the mean brother to Sigmund?
Yeah, that was a great delight for me because the original Sigmund and the Sea Monsters was one of my first early favorite TV shows. And I do believe it was one of the only Sid and Marty Krofft shows where they did multiple seasons. I think Land of the Lost, they did multiple seasons. But whereas before, like Puff and Stuff, they did one season and just realized, oh, we can just syndicate this and it'll just make money for us. So there were a lot of episodes of Sigmund. I love that show. And then I got to be in the reboot. It was awesome. And Johnny Whitaker was in there, the kid from the original show, all grown up. And I really, really enjoyed playing Blurp because whereas I didn't want to be scary to the little kids or he's the mean brother. But he's a little scary. He's got sharp teeth, whereas the other one, Slurp, doesn't have sharp teeth and stuff. I kind of delighted in the notion of being something that might give kids a little bit of a thrill, kind of a safe scare, you know what I mean? A soft scare, but still a little something that people might get a little kick out of him. And for me, it was just a delight to be a part of the reboot of that because it felt like something in me was coming full circle that I got to work on. I'd imagine it to be like working on Sesame Street. It'd be great to be a part of that because holy moly, it's been around all my life. So that was a great thrill and a great honor. It was a great experience working with Sid and Marty Krofft. It was great working down at the beach under the cliff where the Planet of the Apes, where Charlton Heston saw the Statue of Liberty down there at Point Magoo, I think it is. That was just a delight. Like that was just like a life milestone for me that I didn't expect to come along, because I didn't expect them to do a reboot of that show, but that I got to be a part of it was a great honor.
And what was it like sort of creating the performance of Blurp with the suit performer as well? And I'm sorry, I tried to research the suit performer's name and I came up with a couple different answers, so I didn't want to say, but, working with someone else to kind of create that one performance.
That was great working with the suit performer was Megan Godfrey, who's a stunt woman and a suit performer. And I will say that she was so good. I couldn't believe that she didn't have a monitor inside the suit. I would kind of like give her a little quiet direction before a take and say, okay, you're going to turn a little bit here, turn a little bit there, like, okay, move your head a little bit like that. But once we were rolling, it was as if she had a monitor in the suit. She's Megan Godfrey. She's a really talented performer. And it was just great fun working with her and trying to crack her up over the comms in between takes and things like that. I had a great time with her. I would say another great suit performer is Morgana Ignis, who was inside Ned, and she was inside Edgar on Curious Creations. I couldn't believe she didn't have a monitor inside the suit because she was so good on camera. It's spooky how both of those performers were to be able to nail the takes without being able to see what they were doing. So when you find a performer like that, it is kind of weird how you just get into this simpatico. Like a great credit to the Ned team on Earth to Ned, because that was a very complicated, gigantic puppet to work. And when you watch that show, it looks like an organic living being, you know? So
Right.
great talented groups of people there.
You played Rankle on the Curious Creations of Christine McConnell, and he's such an interesting puppet. Was he like an RC puppet, a remote control, or were there cables attached, or how did Rankle work?
Yeah, that was easy street for me, boyo, because I was controlling his face, his mouth, and his eyes, sitting in a chair, 10 yards away from the set. And puppeteer Tim Lagasse, he was the one that had to be jammed underneath of things and hidden behind walls and whatnot. Like I said, his face is all animatronic, but his body is cables. So his body is mechanical and controlled by steel or metal cables and stuff. And he's got different articulation points. He does basically just sit. Like there wasn't a budget to make him walk around or anything like that. So he just sort of appears in places and sits there and does his snide little comments. But all I had to do was sit in the, kind of a little video village for puppeteers and do my thing. And poor Tim had to be twisted like a pretzel underneath the couch or et cetera. So combination of a practical mechanical puppet and an animatronic puppet. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, I think I was there one day and Colleen Smith, like took me on just a little tour of the set because I didn't, I wasn't in there, know what was going on. And that set was like so packed into the
Yeah.
soundstage. Like it was like you had to squeeze between things. And
Yeah.
so even just, I imagine puppeteering was even crazier for
Well,
Tim.
for Tim and Colleen, yeah, for those people that
Yeah.
had to be rolling around or underneath things on that set. But like I said, I had it easy. The only weird thing about me was I was using a Futaba controller, which is a model aircraft controller to radio signal controlling his face, and I was wearing the lavalier mic on the headband on my forehead like we do, and the sound department said that they could hear the sticks on the Futaba controller moving around, and it was messing up the audio take. So I had to put a blanket on my lap. So it looked very strange. Me over there, this weirdo in the corner with a blanket on his lap,
With
you
his
can
hands
imagine,
moving.
with his
Yeah.
hands moving around,
Yeah.
talking in a funny little accent.
No
But
wonder the set was closed.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, you're right about the set. They used every inch of the soundstage and they really jammed the sets right up against each other. It was a lot of cable everywhere and everything, but they used every inch of it.
As someone who is I know a lover of cats, was it fun to play a cat? And did you get to bring anything about living with cats into Rankle's personality?
Not so much, except for maybe the hissing. Like the hissing wasn't scripted, but I would, whenever he would get so upset at somebody, I would just have him hiss at them or something like that because I know that's a very cat-like thing to do. You
Yeah.
know, he was less of. I always felt like I don't think this is canon, but he was more of like he was a very haughty, like old pharaoh who was trapped in the body of a cat. So he didn't act particularly cat-like, or if he did act cat-like of coughing up a hairball, which he does at one point in the show, he didn't think it was undignified, but that was just part of his new reality, I guess. But deep inside, he's like this grand pharaoh king of all he surveys kind of a guy who's now stuck in the body of this rotting cat.
Well, let's wrap things up here by talking about Earth to Ned, which was just so much of a fun show to work on, and just really, really great. And you, of course, played Cornelius, who was sort of like the Andy Richter, or if
Yeah,
you're older than that, the Ed McMahon of
yeah, yeah.
of the thing. What would I mean? I know it because I was there, but I would love for you to tell people what the audition process was like to kind of make it through to become Cornelius.
Well, Brian Henson just got a bunch of us together and just did. I think he did chemistry mixes. He would have us all play against each other, or with each other rather. And I auditioned for both roles. I auditioned for Ned and auditioned for Cornelius. And I guess there were maybe 3 rounds of auditions. I can recall 2. Maybe there were 3. And I kind of didn't think I was going to get it. I don't know why, but I don't know. I just thought, just do your best and hope for the best. And the final chemistry thing I did was with Paul, and I just felt so comfortable with Paul. And I think I clicked into a method of playing off of Paul Rugg and feeding him, and he fed me. But also in that final callback, I sort of clicked into Cornelius's place, where he sort of represents the kind of put upon employee who kind of loves his job, kind of loves his boss, but it's kind of a love-hate relationship that he's only semi-conscious of. And I knew that it would be a source of great comedy. And that sure enough came out in our final chemistry read, because Paul was just really dogpiling on the poor Cornelius about talking about all the places he was going to send him and what he was going to have to make him. We riffed about toddler beauty pageants. And he came up with, like, you know what we're going to do, Cornelius? He wasn't named Cornelius at the time. He was called Sebastian at the time. He
That's
said,
right.
we're gonna send you up, and you're gonna enter one of these. You're gonna enter one of these toddler and tiara kind of beauty contests. And something about I riffed about, like, that's not gonna go so well. Remember that time you made me pretend I was a cow, and that's where that phrase "you milked me, they milked me, sir" came from. That callback. That was my as you recall on set, when I was trying to figure out and remember the voice for Cornelius, my quick little shorthand to remember the voice was to remind myself of when I said, "They milked me, sir. They milked me." And on set, people are like, "What's he talking about?" I was like, he's just trying to get back into character.
Who's saying he milked me? What is
Yeah,
the
what is that
celebrities?
all about?
Yeah,
What is that? Yeah. Some of the celebs are kind of like. I'm glad you mentioned Andy Richter, because, like, in the show, he gave Cornelius advice on how to be a good sidekick. But backstage, before we shot, I asked him, like, I've never done a talk show, I've never hosted anything like this. How do you? And the advice he gave me on camera was very similar to the advice he gave me backstage, which is just know when to be quiet, which is most of the time, and only step in if you think you got a real zinger. Otherwise, you're there to make the host look good and, give the host and the guest someone to play off of. But it was nerve-wracking in the beginning. But by the end of it, I realized we're going to be talking to this person for 45 minutes, this guest, that's going to be boiled down to 8 minutes. So
yeah,
if I try something and it stinks up the joint, no harm, no foul. They're just going to cut it out,
right.
I would plan some things I wanted to ask the people. They gave us research if I didn't know who the guest was, and I'd studied on the person the night before. And I would kind of always make sure I had something to offer, kind of going back to that thing about my job is to give the production, what the production needs in that moment and not be intimidated by it. But I've been hired to offer. So to make sure I had something to offer, and I'm very proud of the things I came up with that did make it into the final cut. When I did an impromptu Star Wars quiz, going back to Star Wars, and that day there were representatives from Lucasfilm on the set, and they said, "Yeah, your trivia questions are really good." I'm like, "Oh, thank you. I'm an old Star Wars geek from long ago."
Yeah. How can I get on Mandalorian?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
What I love about Cornelius is, out of everyone really on the show, he went out into the real world,
Yeah.
and he got to do all this dog grooming and my favorite, pro wrestling, and
Yep. Yep. Yep.
all these different things. Did you enjoy filming those segments, or would you have preferred to just stay in the studio and do the studio segments?
No, I loved them. I love doing them
Yeah,
because, this is a side note, one of the fun things is, like, just all people, when they see a puppet working, just get reduced to little children. So it's just like, I like doing man in the street things with puppets. I did that a little bit on No You Shut Up. And, like, we would do these excursions on the weekends. We shot those on the weekends. Like, I remember there's one we did a coffee shop where Cornelius tries to hide out as a human. He's got Groucho glasses on. He's not fooling anybody. And it's almost like put on a puppet show for the people watching, watching us
yeah.
shoot, the people walking by, or the wrestlers that were there that day. And it was just, I had such a great time playing Cornelius. I didn't mind working 6 or 7 days a week, because look what I got to do. I got to be Cornelius. It was delightful. I figured out how to adjust my energy and get through those 2 months of shooting, and I had a great time. No, I didn't mind doing them at all. I loved it. I loved it.
Do you have a preference since you've done well? I guess Cornelius is sort of a combination of a hand puppet and a creature. But do you have a preference on which one you prefer, like more the hand and rod puppet up style puppets, or do you prefer doing the creature type stuff?
I don't know that I have a preference, and I'll take whatever I get to do. The old kid in me that used to look at Starlog magazine and the behind the scenes stuff, I get a real kick out of the animatronic puppets for sure, the creature puppets, because they're just, they're doing that thing of trying to trick you into thinking they're real. So whenever I get a chance to work something like that, that's exciting to me. The soft puppets are a challenge, but they're delightful. It's not something I take for granted. I always try to be as good of a soft puppeteer as I can be, and I hope I do well.
A few years ago, you created your own web series, Advocat,
Yeah.
and you've done a few different web series, different productions with Jim Henson and stuff like that. Do you work on creating your own projects and pitching and creating your own stuff?
I do a little bit lately. I have just because I'm, as we say in the business, in between gigs. I'm not, I kind of came up as a performer and as an actor, and it makes you, I gotta say, it kind of made me maybe a little passive in my career at first. Like, I thought it was noble to just be ready to go and ready to audition and audition like crazy and get the gig and then serve the director, serve the text, serve the performance. And so it didn't really dawn on me to create my own work, kind of like the generation where everyone's an influencer, everyone's a TikToker now, or like people like become reality stars and then they end up being in narrative and stuff. So it's not necessarily in my wheelhouse to do that. But I will say I have been writing lately, and I did come up with a show. I did pitch it to Henson, and I've got other ideas, and I just look forward to seeing if I can kind of get them out of my brain and onto the page and see if something can come out of it. So it's kind of like, as I focus on the next chapter of my career, I think I would like to move into, because one thing I think about my career as an improvising puppeteer is like, hey, I've been giving it away. I've been, I've been kind of like coming up with witty, great stuff, but I would like to maybe get that on the page and try to, be a show creator and not just a show contributor. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we'll see. In the next chapter of my life, I hope to do more of that work.
excellent. Well, Michael, I always like to ask at the end of every interview, what has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
No, it's got to be Earth to Ned, and I'll say Earth to Ned because it was a great gig. But most importantly to me, it came out during the height of the pandemic, where there were no vaccines and people were in lockdown, and a lot of the critics, it was pretty well critically acclaimed for the critics that would bother to write about it. A lot of them have said, like, this is the perfect show for these times. This is a balm to these scary times we're all in. And actually, I will read a tweet to you that I actually printed up because it meant so much to me. Someone named Jordan Beck, who is at Dr_Magnifico, wrote, "My son was 6 for quarantine year, and Earth to Ned was hands down his favorite show. No hyperbole. It was one of the things that made all of the bad and scary stuff outside go away. We've probably watched every episode 20 plus times. #thanks to Ned." As much as I would love for that show to be readily available to everybody still, and they would do multiple seasons for numerous reasons, creatively, artistically, and financially, the fact that I created a character and was part of a show that soothed people during troubled times means probably more to me than anything else I've ever done. I may not have the fanciest career, but the times where I've been able to touch an audience and soothe them, make them laugh, or just make them feel better or forget their cares, that's a pretty good way to live, I think.
Excellent. Michael Oosterom, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Grant.
Many thanks to my friend Michael Oosterom for joining me on this episode. For links to some of the things we discussed, check out the show notes for this episode number 85, over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear even more of my chat with Michael Oosterom, download the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android and click on the gift icon in the listing for this episode. Well, now it's time to announce the winner of episode 84's giveaway for a 2023 adult membership to the Puppeteers of America. The question was, where did Dustin Curtis say he had a lot of photos from during his trip to Prague? And the answer is various museums featuring the history of Czech puppetry. And the winner is Malachi Havens. Congratulations, Malachi, your Puppeteers of America membership is on the way. We're going to take a bit of a break from giveaways for now, but stay tuned. You never know when they might return. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. I want to send out a special thank you to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who help make this show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout out are Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Andrew Calcagno, Tony Urbano, Brandy, David Akers, Paul, Scott Armstrong, and Vicky Sebring. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up your monthly pledge today. And thank you for your support. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, call our voicemail line at 818-806-9604 or click the Call the Show button in the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android. You can also send your feedback via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. This episode featured music by Dan Ring and was edited by the highly talented Steven Staver. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2023 Saturday Morning Media Grandpa Choco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. Under the Puppet proudly presents The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth Reunion. In this almost 90-minute video, you will hear great stories from the cast and crew who brought this amazing puppet show to life. Plus, you'll see never-before-seen artwork and exclusive behind-the-scenes video. Under the Puppet's Timmy the Tooth Reunion is available right now at timmy.underthepuppet.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.